Hello everyone, I hope everyone's having a great day wherever they are. And in this video, we're going to be taking a look at Solidity. Specifically, we're going to be looking at a couple different websites before we begin, and then we're going to jump into using the Remix IDE. Remix is a web development platform. Again, you can read a little bit more about it here at remix.ethereum.org. But again, it is a native IDE for Web3 development. It's one of those useful tools that I've come to get used to as I've started to get my familiarity built up using smart contracts. But again, in this video, we're just going to take a brief moment to go over some of the basics. So what I would start by doing first is going to ethereum.org. Here you can learn a little bit more about Ethereum, kind of go over some of the basics. It'll define a lot of the terminology for you in the decentralized finance world. And again, lots of different resources to educate yourself on. Next, I would highly recommend going through some of the basics here with Solidity. Here is where I started to get an introduction. Obviously here, the introduction to smart contracts, and here as well as the installing the Solidity compiler. For that, you would be on your local environment. You don't necessarily need an IDE. Remix just makes your life a whole lot easier when you're just getting started. So without any further ado, we'll kind of jump into it and create our first file. Um, so again, I followed a couple of different tutorials in addition to the documentation. I'll kind of jump around here to show you the first two videos. The first is from the DAP University, how to code your first Ethereum smart contract. And the next one is from the Smart Contract Programmer, and just the counter, Solidity 0.8 application. I also got a lot of help from uh, OpenAI in terms of asking it questions, getting able to feed me bug reports, help me to understand the errors that I was running into. And again, you can use that tool at chat.openai.com. But it's not necessary. It's not completely necessary because a lot of these questions I did have to ask a real person because Solidity is such a new language. But again, we'll start by going over a few examples. Here's an example of the counter contract from this Solidity video. However, we're going to jump into just a simple Google document that has some of the instructions in it already. So we'll kind of go over the instructions first and jump into it just for beginners, anybody who wants to get started using Solidity. So again, in this video, we'll go through the steps we took to create a simple smart contract using Solidity programming language. We'll be using Remix, an online integrated development environment to write and test the code. And then the contract will be titled counter, and it will count the number of times we increment and decrement functions are called. So again, we're just going to make a couple of simple functions here, and then you'll start to see how it looks. Again, don't be afraid to use AI because again, I'm doing the same thing because I'm just getting started. Same thing if you're just getting started with React or another programming language. So here we're in our default workspace, and that's just asking us to rename that. So here we'll click create new file. We'll call it counter.sol for Solidity. The next part, we'll be able to copy this contract that we've already written. And again, feel free to make adjustments to it to your liking. If you want to edit the contract and make it look a little bit different, we'll go ahead and put this in here. You'll notice that the Solidity number matches up as well. And again, we'll kind of break this down a little bit just to make a little bit more sense. So this smart contract is called counter, and it allows us to count the number of times we increment and decrement function. The decrement functions are called. The contract has a set variable called count, which is initially set to 0, and it keeps track of the current count value. There are two events defined in the code, excuse me, defined in the contract: increment and decrement, and these events are emitted when the corresponding functions are called. The getCount function is a view function, which means it does not modify the contract state. It simply returns the current value of the count variable. Excuse me. The increment function increases the count variable by 1 and emits an increment event with the updated count value. The decrement function decreases the count variable by 1 and emits a decrement event with the updated count value. By calling the increment and decrement functions, you can increment and decrement the count respectively. Again, this isn't something that is entirely useful, but it is just to show beginners that we can interact with a smart contract, or excuse me, build a simple smart contract quite easily, just to kind of get familiar with how these things work. Okay, so we'll go through our instructions here a little bit. Obviously, excuse me, not obviously, but the next step is going to be to compile the code. And in Remix, we can go over here to this tab, the Solidity compiler. Again, make sure our versions match up, and then we can compile it. And if it compiles correctly, we do get this green check mark. If not, you'll see some errors down here. Don't be afraid to feed any of these error message into the AI, because that can give you some good feedback as to why it's not working correctly. So now that we've compiled it, we can go over here to the deploy and run transactions. For this, we're going to go ahead and try the Remix virtual machine mainnet fork. I have run into one issue during these tutorials uh, that increments each value I create by 2. So you'll see that when we call this function, everything doubles for some reason. So I'm still working out exactly why it does that. But just to kind of clarify, I didn't see the instructor in this video or this video run into the same issue. So I'm think it has something to do with the current version of Remix, or the way in which this version of the fork is interacting with this contract. But again, I'm still doing my research into that. So next we'll go ahead, and now that we've seen that when we compile there were any errors, we'll go ahead and deploy the contract. All right, we can see that it deployed without any issues. If you'd like to take a look at some of the transaction details, you can open that up here. And here is where we'll test the increment and decrement function. So here we'll go ahead and take a look at how many totals in there. So 0 and 0. Okay. So if we decrement, it'll fail because we haven't incremented it yet. So go ahead and clear the console. So we'll increment it by 1 hash. Excuse me, 1 hash, doesn't have anything to do with the transaction. That just means that there's 1 hash for this particular contract execution. So we'll go ahead and select increment, and then get count, decrement, get count, decrement, get count. So you can see that it goes down and up by 2 each time. So again, I did warn that this is something I am still trying to learn, why the values are doubling when it increments and decrements in either direction. But again, feel free to play with this type of contract or contracts like this, just to get a feel for how smart contracts work in an IDE environment or in your local environment. Okay, so this again, this is just a kind of a way to kind of get familiar with Solidity and get started. I would encourage anyone who is interested in this project to go to Remix and start to get familiar with Solidity. Check out the Solidity docs page, And of course, always learn more about Ethereum because decentralized finance and the technology behind blockchains isn't going anywhere. And I hope to see you all in the next one. You have a great rest of the day.